She is the eldest daughter of the wealthiest house in the realm. She comes from unimpeachable Valyrian stock, and she has Targaryen blood. What's to mislike?
She is 12.
Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'll be talking about House of the Dragon's second episode, where we get to know the motivations of the individual players in this game a little better. If, unlike me, you haven't read the book to know where things are going, then I guess there was a fairly big development at the end. Overall, palace intrigue with a side of complicated family dynamics is what's on the menu. I think they did a commendable job of serving that up for the second week in a row, while fleshing out some of these situations in a way the book never took the time to. I'll be getting into all of what happened and what I thought about it, and if for some reason you're here without having seen the Rogue Prince yet, then be warned that this will contain spoilers. I will be discussing the book and the original series, but I won't be giving away any future spoilers about what will happen. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. One of the most memorable parts about watching Game of Thrones was the opening credits and theme. And now we have one for House of the Dragon. This wasn't included in my advanced copy, so I haven't had a chance to really break it down, but I did get a sort of Pavlovian response to the theme when it kicked in, and I like the idea that we're seeing this recreation of old Valyria with the blood and everything else that's going on there. So I'll probably talk about this more next week. We open the episode proper with a shot of pirates being slowly picked apart by crabs. Nothing about this looks good. Corlys alluded to it in the first episode. They call this Myrish guy Cragus Drahar the Crabfeeder due to his invented method of punishing his enemies. Here you see that he has them tied to stakes on the ground at low tide, where they wait for it to come in and die by drowning. And in the meantime, there's the crabs. At the small council, they're discussing the death of the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Ryam Redwine. He appeared in the first episode, and I suppose he took ill in the 6 months that have passed since then. He'll be replaced by Harold Westerling, and he wants to get busy right away to add a replacement to get the Kingsguard back up to their full complement of 7 members. Corlys busts in and says that he wants to retake the stepstones from the Crabfeeder. Viserys is reluctant to act because he's not prepared to start a war with the Free Cities. In case you've forgotten, these are in Essos. They're called the Free Cities because all of them except Braavos were founded for different reasons by Valyria, but they were allowed to rule themselves. Braavos was the exception in that it was started by some escaped slaves. Several characters visited them in the original series. Daenerys started her journey hiding out at Illyrio Mopatis' place in Pentos in Season 1, and Varys took Tyrion there in Season 5 after he killed his father. Arya went to the House of Black and White in Braavos to find the Faceless Men, and that's also where the Iron Bank is from. You'll remember they're the people that the crown goes to when it needs an infusion of cash. There are 9 free cities in total, and in the book the Triarchy is made up of Lys, Tyrosh, and Myr. Here, when Viserys is pushed, he says he has acted by sending envoys to Pentos and Volantis. So I'm not sure if they switched them up or if this is to imply he sent them somewhere neutral to have their talks. The Stepstones are a group of small islands that legend says were created when the Children of the Forest used their magic to destroy a land bridge called the Arm of Dorne that connected Westeros to Essos. This was during their war with the First Men, who were using it as their way to relocate to Westeros. This was about 12,000 years before Aegon's conquest, and of course it didn't work to stop the immigration. The islands themselves aren't important, but the trade route connecting the Narrow and Summer Seas is, and that's why Corlys wants to act. When the king isn't interested, we see Corlys get a little personal. We learn that Daemon went to Dragonstone rather than going back to his wife as he was ordered to, and he's been posted up there for 6 months without any protest from his brother. As she's performing her role as cupbearer, Rhaenyra interjects that they have dragon riders and her father should send them to take care of it. Her idea is to make a show of force, and the whole room silently agrees that she's talking out of turn. Otto suggests they find a better use of the princess's talents, which is another way of saying that they don't want her involved in matters of the state. They send her to look at the Kingsguard candidates instead. She sees a member of House Karen, which is from the Stormlands, loyal to House Baratheon, and a Malister from Seaguard in the Riverlands. But she's concerned because they just seem like a bunch of tourney knights. In other words, none of them have seen actual combat other than Sir Criston Cole. His introduction as the son of a steward of the Lord of Blackhaven indicates he's basically a nobody compared to these other guys. And I kind of loved how he's standing alone with no banner or squire right there between what I think are knights from House Crakehall and Tarly. In episode 1, we saw him best Daemon, so we know he's a skilled fighter. And while Rhaenyra says she's choosing him because of his experience, this is also going to be her personal protector, so it seems like there might be more to it, especially in the way she looks at him compared to the others. Otto tries to talk to her about the politics of things, saying that Seaguard, for instance, provides protection from reavers from the Iron Islands. This is part of his job, and he's not wrong, but she's insistent, saying her father should be protected by someone with combat experience, and she ends up getting her way. You get the sense that he has to let her do what she wants, but he doesn't much like it. And there's a lot to consider in these first few scenes. Rhaenyra has been the named heir for 6 months, but you don't get the sense that people are enthusiastic about the situation. A little later, we'll see her at the Sept with Alicent, and that she just wants her father to see her as more than his little girl. Also, when Otto is trying to talk to her out of picking Criston, we see Rhaenys looking on from a distance, and we'll see more of her in a bit. In his chambers, Viserys talks about Valyrian history with Alicent as they look at this huge model of the freehold he has. And it turns out that he actually didn't build it. I imagine dads everywhere who like to go out to their shops to work on their projects let out a collective sigh. Sorry, but this king might not be just like you after all. It turns out he just looks over the text and plans things out, and then has his stonemasons do all the real work for him. But hey, he's still a sucker for history. And he tells her about the height of the freehold when they had over 1,000 dragons and a navy large enough to span the seas of the world. He drops a miniature dragon as he's telling her that the glory of old Valyria will never be seen again, and that provides a moment for them to touch hands and gaze into each other's eyes. It will also be a way for her to further endear herself to him when she has it repaired later. He changes the subject to Rhaenyra, saying he wishes they could talk, and then asks Alicent not to mention that they have these conversations. He does get a chance to talk to his daughter over dinner a little later. It's fairly awkward, and while he gets to express the love he had for her mother, it ends with neither one of them being very satisfied. And one of the funniest things the show has done is have him sitting way more comfortably with his hand in a bowl full of maggots in the very next scene. He's way more relaxed in that situation. This is an effort to fix his hand, which he cut on the Iron Throne. And as I mentioned in my last video, that's a lore thing that's supposed to be an indication that the king isn't fit to rule the kingdom. He tells Otto about Corlys and Rhaenys' visit and their proposal for him to marry their 12-year-old daughter. On paper, this makes sense. As Corlys pointed out, it would bring the two houses of Old Valyria together. They have dragons, and he has a powerful navy, and it would make for a powerful bond, and show the kingdom that there are better days ahead. With Grand Maester Mellos being there, that means that there's 2 members of the small council present, and it's 1 for and 1 against, because Otto really wants him to marry his daughter. He can't actually come out and say that. It would look like he was overreaching his station, but it's not like he's going to get behind the idea of him marrying Laena. And the second funniest thing the show does is have him walk with this would-be 12-year-old bride. As the kid she is, she just wants to talk about dragons, which is super cute, and he tries to at least answer her questions, saying that he was Balerion's last rider, that he claimed him right before he died. Viserys wasn't much of a dragon rider because he never claimed another one after that. She brings up Vhagar, and we find out that this other old and giant dragon is out there on its own somewhere because it's too large for the dragon pit. It's one of those things where this type of thing happened throughout throughout history for reasons related to power, and they do a fine enough job of laying out why it would make sense. But then you think about what would this actually be like, and they show that it's just as absurd as you'd think it would be when an adult and the child he's about to marry try to have a conversation. Rhaenys and Rhaenyra talk, and the queen who never was lays out the reality of the situation. Even if it's not to her daughter, the king will remarry, and he will produce more heirs. And if one of them is a male, then at least some people will expect him to be the next king. Rhaenyra points out that a lot of lords bent the knee to her and swore fealty, but she's speaking from the experience of being passed over, and says that the men of the kingdom would rather put the realm to the torch than let a woman ascend to the Iron Throne. In some ways, their two situations are quite different, but seeing how the people closest to the king aren't exactly jumping in line behind Rhaenyra does make it seem like that she's probably not wrong. Speaking of being passed over, after not getting his brother's attention by sitting in Dragonstone for half a year, Daemon decides to steal a dragon's egg to further stir things up. He says that Mysaria is with child, that he'll be making her his second wife like their ancestors used to do, and he invites his brother to attend the wedding. Viserys sees this for what it is, and is almost set to ignore him again until Rhaenyra finds out that he took the same egg she chose to put in Balon the heir for a day's cradle before her mother died. When he hears that, he's ready to go get it back himself, but Otto steps in, partly because it's his job to keep the king safe, but also because he hates Daemon and wants to make it seem like his brother doesn't care enough about him to actually go. It all makes for a nice shot of Dragonstone where things get pretty tense. Everyone present knows this is going to turn into a bloodbath, especially when Caraxes makes an appearance, but it's still a little hard to see how Daemon can back down. The whole thing is a farce to get his brother's attention, and it's not working. And it really could have gone sideways if Rhaenyra didn't show up and talk sense into him. I suppose it's obvious, but I still have to mention that this is what happens when people in these positions don't get what they want. They throw their little tantrums, and other people end up getting hurt. And I thought they did a pretty good job of showing Mysaria's point of view in this, in that she doesn't appreciate being used as a prop. He thinks that he would be able to protect her and tries to tell her not to worry. But from her perspective, and she's definitely not wrong, she is expendable, and this doesn't do anything but paint a target on her back. She says, "You are Targaryen. You can afford to play your stupid games with the king," which of course we see that playing out in front of us in real time. She points out that she isn't there because she wants his gold or power for herself. She came to him to be liberated from the fear that she's known for as long as she can remember. This is something that Daemon would never consider because the characters at the center of this story believe they're owed respect and deference and to get what they want based on who they are. They were born into this and have had that reinforced throughout their lives, having been raised at the center of an empire at its height. They like to talk a lot about the duty that goes along with that, but generally still behave like privileged, spoiled brats because they can. Generally speaking, when things go wrong because of the decisions they make, they won't experience the worst of it. And so it makes sense here to show the perspective of someone else who would. Back in King's Landing, Viserys isn't coming around to the idea of marrying Laena, and he goes to his master of laws, Lionel Strong, for an unencumbered opinion. He retells him all the reasons why it makes sense in a very straightforward way, with the added she will mature when faced with the obvious problem of her being 12. In no uncertain terms, he says, "You should wed Laena Velaryon, my grace. He should give Corlys what he wants and fix him at his side permanently." Before he can respond, he's surprised when he gets word that the princess has returned from Dragonstone. He goes to ream her out because she's his only heir, and she went behind his back, put herself in danger, and if something were to happen, then that would put the future of their house in question. She points out that she did it to retrieve the egg without bloodshed. She's probably not wrong about not knowing if Otto would have been able to do that. As much as the king is bothered by what Daemon's doing, he's still his brother. She knows they care about each other. And then he comes around when he realizes she's a lot like her mother. They share a moment where he again tells her how hard losing Emma has been, And when she tells him that it pleases her to know that she's not alone in that, he transitions to saying that the small council is pressuring him to marry. It's a return to the uncomfortable, where they talk about each other in this detached way as if they're not right there sitting in front of each other. The actors do a great job of navigating away from a loving father talking to his daughter to a king who is bound by duty. In her response, Rhaenyra matches that and gives him a way out. He has to do this because it's his responsibility. As the king, his first duty is to the realm, and she adds that her mother would have understood just as she does. Because these are two people who are not capable of talking in a completely honest way in this circumstance, you have to look past the actual words they're saying. Her father is telling her that he'll never replace her mother, just like he'd never replace her as heir, but also saying that they need to do everything they can to protect their family's position. This is him confirming the first part of what Rhaenys told her earlier. She plays the role she's been given to be supportive in a selfless way, but it's also not clear if she's pulling it off. She didn't ask to be named heir, but now that she has been, you can see through her reaction that she doesn't like the idea of it being taken away from her. He's also completely talking around what his real issue with taking a queen is. And so when the small council meets a little later, she's just as caught off guard as Corlys Velaryon is when he announces that he's going to marry Alicent. It's a moment where reality shatters your ideas about who you are and what you're capable of. Rhaenyra had been supportive. She understood the situation, and she was willing to go along with it for her family. Faced with the idea of her father marrying her close friend and being completely blindsided by it hurts her in a way that makes her leave the room. Corlys reacts exactly as Lionel said he would and leaves himself, but unlike Rhaenyra, we get a chance to see where he goes with it. He invites Daemon over to his island to meet with him because, as he presents it, they're both men who've had to cut their way through the world, and you can see where he's coming from. At this point in history, his family is richer than the Lannisters or the Hightowers. What he's saying about his personal history is true. He built that up in a way that the likes of the current Targaryens can't understand, and I don't want to go into that completely right here, but he set out on 9 great voyages and made a name for himself while amassing a fortune. His house goes back to old Valyria. They might even be older than the Targaryens, and I love how he adds according to some text there. But there's still a big difference since his family weren't dragon lords. By marrying Rhaenys, he brought dragons into his house, but forming an alliance with Daemon here would allow him to do what he wants without too much worry about how Viserys might respond. They've drilled his reluctance to move against his brother into our heads, and Corlys picked up on that, and it's something he can use to his advantage. Plus, what he's saying to win him over here is basically sincere. He knows Daemon doesn't really have a place, he's got that second son energy, and now he's outside of the line of succession. The realm's fighters are also itching for action, and as the episode comes to an end, you get the sense that these two might be able to make that happen. As a person who is a big fan of the world George R.R. Martin created, I can't help but enjoy the chance to dig back into all of this stuff. That part of me is really enjoying how they're adding to the story and leaning into presenting these characters with chances to do something different. There is an inevitability baked in, because most people know the realm isn't this way during Game of Thrones. So they are making the effort to try to make us care about what happens to these characters. I thought it worked best this week with Alicent, who spent most of her time pushed off to the side of everything else that was going on. I liked how they show her always putting on her best face and saying the right things, while showing her nervously picking at her fingernails when she's alone. The fact that her father brings this up in the way he does, and just how clueless that makes him seem about what she's going through, what he's encouraging her to put herself through, does a lot to add to that character. In the book, all of this just sort of happens off page, and that makes her less sympathetic. I think here we see someone who is doing what she thinks she has to based on her position and the world she lives in. If you think about it, she gave both father and daughter sound advice when they confided in her. I also liked that there were some genuinely funny parts mixed in there. Viserys just casually dipping his hand into those maggots and effortlessly conversing with Otto after seeing him struggle to talk with his daughter was great. Little Laena being so pumped up to talk about dragons in the middle of that absurdity. And I didn't mention it before, but Daemon tossing the egg back to Rhaenyra before he backed down on the bridge was weirdly endearing. There was a lot of interesting connections to the original series, and I think my favorite was seeing the sept that's in King's Landing at this time. You'll notice that it's not that sept. The Great Sept of Baelor that Cersei did her thing to in the season 6 finale. That was constructed by and named after King Baelor the Blessed, whose reign doesn't happen until decades after what we're watching now. Having said all of that, I think the side of me that's a fan of great TV is a little less convinced this week. There were a couple of things that felt sort of clunky in this episode, and I'll just mention two. The sequence when Rhaenyra is going to his chambers after being called to meet with her father, it all felt a little bit off. The score kicks in and it seems like they wanted to have this build-up that didn't really land. There's also this long shot where you could almost mistake Millie Alcock for Emilia Clarke, which I don't think does either character very many favors. Also, the long, slow reveal that Corlys is talking to Daemon felt unnecessary. They're just small cracks, but they're the kinds of things that could add up. Generally speaking, my enjoyment of the lore allows me to gloss over these types of things. But I hope this is more about the fact that this is the first season rather than signs of not being able to live up to the hype. They have the advantage of mostly keeping things close to King's Landing with regular trips to Dragonstone, and the nerd in me can't wait to see more of the House Velaryon seat at Driftmark. You do get a nice little tease of some of the treasures he's collected on his voyages, but this is also a big undertaking. Even scaled down, Westeros is daunting, so I hope they'll be able to make it all work. I would say so far they are, especially in moments like the shot of the bridge at Dragonstone. This looked amazing, and they did a good job of presenting the different sides and what the motivations were in a way that is very Game of Thrones. The acting is also strong. There were a ton of great small moments delivered by everyone, and it's all very promising for what's to come. I'm excited to see what happens next, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the episode. How do you feel about Daemon becoming the rogue prince? And I'm especially interested to see how things landed for people who don't know what's coming. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.